Would you dare to save a strange, bound creature lying across the railroad tracks when your entire town walks away like nothing happened? This isn't a fairy tale. In a remote mountain town in Kentucky, a baby Bigfoot and its wounded mother were thrown onto train tracks, discarded like garbage by someone powerful, someone rich. People passed by. A man in a suit paused, then turned. A teenager trembled, but left. And the train was coming. Only one man stepped forward. Ernie Barlow, 64 years old, homeless, forgotten, dropped his bag of bottles and ran with nothing but an old folding knife. He cut the ropes, pulled the creatures away, and rolled into the ditch just as the train roared past. He thought she'd attack him. She didn't. The mother Bigfoot pressed her forehead gently against his chest. A silent thank you. A bond was formed. I followed this story for over 2 years, through lost records, blurry Polaroids, and first-hand accounts. And in this video, I'll show you the heartbreaking truth behind what really happened, why a wealthy woman tried to erase them, and what Ernie did next that would break even the toughest heart. Even if you've never believed in Bigfoot, this story will make you believe in compassion, because Ernie didn't just rescue them. He built a quiet family under that bridge. He shared his food, his warmth, his silence. And when the day came to let them go, he stood between the mother and armed officials, arms open, voice trembling. If you have to take someone, take me first. Now, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from, dear friend? And more importantly, what's your name? How far do you think this story of love and courage can go? Let's send a warm hello to every kind soul listening right now. If this touched you even a little, tap like, hit subscribe, and help us grow a community that believes in Bigfoot, in kindness, and in second chances. It was early spring, and the mountains of Harlan County hadn't yet shaken off the grip of winter. Rain fell like needles, sharp and steady, washing over the rock and rust of the narrow pass that cut through Clover Gap. Cold clung to everything, the kind that soaked through denim and settled into bone. A single road, cracked and worn, wound along the base of the ridge like a scar left by something old and violent. On most days, the only sound here came from the wind curling through pine or the rumble of distant coal trains weaving through the Daniel Boone forest. But today, it was a car that broke the silence. A black Lincoln town car rolled to a stop where the gravel shoulder dipped toward the tracks. The engine idled low, a dull growl against the hush of the hills. The car was polished too clean for this place, its sheen like oil slicked over decay. The door opened, and a man in a tailored suit stepped out. He didn't glance at the sky or the mud that sucked at his loafers. He moved like someone who didn't have to answer for the mess he made. He walked around to the trunk, pressed the release. The lid rose with a whisper. Then, a burlap sack, heavy and writhing, was dragged out and dropped like garbage. The thud was wet, like a body. He paused only long enough to kick it with his boot, watching as the shape inside squirmed. Another smaller bundle followed, softer this time, barely moving. He didn't speak, didn't check, didn't look back. He slammed the trunk closed, slid into the driver's seat, and drove off into the fog. The sack twitched once, then went still. A minute passed. 2. Then the larger bundle shuddered violently. Inside, claws, dark and cracked, ripped at the coarse fabric. A faint sound came from within, half choked, part growl, part plea. Rain soaked through the sack, turning burlap to pulp, making it easier to tear. Threads snapped. Blood mixed with the mud beneath it. The shape inside fought harder now, frantic. A small shape tumbled free from the torn bottom. It landed hard on the gravel, limbs flailing. It was a young one, barely the size of a toddler, with thick sodden fur plastered against thin ribs. Eyes blinked up through the rain, wide, golden, terrified. It looked down the rails, then back at the sack. It didn't run. Instead, it scrambled back toward the larger bundle, tiny hands pulling, tugging, biting at the knots. A low sound rumbled from inside, and the little one answered with a soft, panicked cry. Something primal, something that should never have been witnessed by men. Behind them, far down the line, the scream of a freight train cut through the mountains. The rails began to tremble. Atop the ridge, hidden behind a wall of brush, a teenage boy stood frozen. Milo Cade had seen the whole thing. He hadn't meant to. He was just skipping school again, out here smoking and pretending not to care about anything. But when the car came, he crouched low. When the sacks were dropped, he didn't move. And now, watching that small, broken creature try to save what must have been its mother, something in his chest cracked. He stepped forward, then stopped. His hands trembled, legs shook. He looked back the way he came, and he turned around and ran. Elsewhere, another car slowed. Not the kind with tinted windows and city plates. This one was old, beat up, and clattered like bones in a tin can. It didn't stop. The driver glanced toward the tracks, saw the movement, the chaos, and looked away. Like he'd seen a ghost and decided to forget it. The train was closer now. Lights curved through the mist, casting long shadows through the gorge. And then, from beneath the rickety bridge, a man appeared. Ernie Barlow didn't look like a hero. 67 years old, clothes soaked through, a sack of aluminum cans strapped to his back. He was half limping from a bum knee and hadn't shaved in weeks. But when he heard that cry, sharp, animal, too close to human, he dropped the bag without thinking. His boots sank into the gravel as he scrambled up the embankment. The train horn wailed again, louder now, the vibration crawling up through the soles of his feet. He saw the little one first, still pulling at the bag. The mother's arm had fallen free, long and matted with blood. She wasn't moving. Ernie didn't hesitate. He drew the old folding knife from his pocket, rusted at the hinge but sharp enough, and dropped to his knees beside the sack. The young one snarled, baring baby teeth. He met its eyes, then nodded slowly. "I ain't here to hurt her." The creature blinked. Then it stepped back. Ernie sliced through the ropes, hands shaking as he worked fast. Rain blurred his vision. The rails were shaking hard now, vibrating the earth beneath them. The sound of the engine was a roar. He grabbed the end of the sack, wrapped it around his shoulders, and heaved with everything left in his old bones. The weight nearly pulled him down. He stumbled, fell to a knee, but he didn't let go. The train screamed around the bend. Ernie dragged the sack off the tracks, the young one scrambling beside him. He rolled over the far side just as steel thundered past, a rush of wind and noise and heat, inches from his boots. The ground shook so hard he thought his heart might quit right there. Then silence. Just rain, just breath, just the sound of the world not ending. Ernie laid back in the wet earth, chest heaving. The sack beside him twitched, and slowly the mother lifted her head. She looked at him. She didn't snarl, didn't move to strike. She just looked, deep, tired, with a kind of pain he didn't have words for. Her breathing was ragged. One leg was twisted wrong. Her arms cradled the little one as it curled into her side. Then, without sound, she reached one long arm toward Ernie. She pressed her palm, bloodied, rough, enormous, lightly against the center of his chest. It wasn't force, it wasn't threat. It was something like thanks. He didn't breathe for a second. The contact was warm, alive. The air between them held a weight older than language. She pulled back, blinked once, and passed out. Ernie gathered the young one into his coat. It didn't resist. Its small fingers gripped his flannel, clung to the wool lining like a child who didn't know what else to do. The sky above them remained slate gray. The train had vanished down the gorge, leaving the valley to silence again. And from the trees up high, behind wind and rain, something else watched. Not hunters, not men. Something tall, still, silent, but not indifferent. Ernie didn't look up. He wrapped his arms tighter around the little one and sat with his back to the rocks, eyes fixed on the mother. The rain kept falling. The mountain stayed quiet. And the story, The real story began right there, between two lives that were never meant to cross, in a place most men had long stopped seeing. He didn't know what he'd do next, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't leaving them there. Not in that world. Not ever again. And far down the slope, Milo Cade finally stopped running. He collapsed behind a fallen log, gasping, shaking, teeth chattering from more than just the cold. He wiped his face with his sleeve, looked back toward the bridge, and whispered to himself like a confession. I should have helped. Then he tore out a page from his notebook, still wet from the rain, and with a trembling hand began to write something down. A name, a time, a license plate. He didn't know why. Not yet. But one day it would matter, and the Gap would remember. The first thing Ernie noticed was the heat. The sun had started to rise, and it pressed down thick over the gorge like a wet towel. The creek below the wooden bridge whispered softly as it moved past moss-covered rocks. Cicadas had begun their slow, grating rhythm from somewhere up the hill. Somewhere in the world, it was a normal summer morning. But not here, beneath the warped bones of the old railroad trestle. Ernie Barlow opened his eyes to a world that didn't feel quite like the one he'd fallen asleep in. His back ached from sleeping against rock. His coat was still wet in patches, and the smell of rust and wet wood clung to everything. But none of that mattered, because there, nestled against his chest, was a weight he didn't dare move. The young one had curled into him during the night, pressed tight against the warmth of his body. Its breathing was shallow and fast, like a puppy's, but it hadn't stirred once, not even when he shifted. One small arm lay across his ribs, claws curled in sleep. Its fur was coarse, dark with streaks of copper, and dried blood still crusted near its shoulder. Just beyond them, barely a yard away, the mother sat motionless. She hadn't closed her eyes all night. Her chest rose and fell slow, steady, like the breath of something half in this world, half out. Her eyes tracked him calmly now. No panic, no rage. Just quiet. Waiting. He didn't speak. Didn't want to break whatever thin thread held this moment together. Instead, he reached slowly into his satchel, pulled out what was left of the bread from 2 days ago. It was stale, cracked when he broke it. But he held it out all the same. The young one stirred at the smell, opened its eyes, looked at him. Then it did something he wouldn't forget for the rest of his life. It waited. Didn't grab, didn't snatch. Just watched him, blinking those golden eyes, until Ernie tore off a piece and held it closer. Then, and only then, did it take it. Gently, like a child who'd been taught manners. It chewed slowly, cheeks puffing out just slightly, eyes still locked on his face, like it was memorizing him. The mother hadn't moved. When he offered her some, she didn't take it. But she didn't growl either. Her leg was worse than he thought. Swollen just above the ankle, fur matted where infection had taken hold. The wound was jagged, likely from a wire snare, the kind poachers left behind in these parts without a second thought. He could smell it now, the sickness. He needed help, but not from just anyone. The walk to Tess Hartley's trailer took 40 minutes on a good day. Today, it felt longer. He left the mother and child in the shade beneath the bridge, wrapped the young one in his flannel shirt, and whispered something he hadn't said in years. "I'll be back, little thing," before he limped off down the trail. By the time he made it to the clinic behind the general store, sweat had soaked his back. Tess wasn't supposed to be there yet, but she was. She was always early, always cleaning, always humming sad songs under her breath. She looked up as he came in, and her mouth opened to say something light, then froze. He didn't give her time to ask. "I need your help, but you can't ask questions yet. You just gotta see." Tess didn't argue. She followed him, grabbed her bag and followed him into the woods like she'd been waiting for someone to give her a reason to do something stupid and good. And when she crawled down under that bridge and saw what waited there, she didn't scream. She didn't run. She just knelt beside the injured mother, eyes wide, and whispered, "Oh, God help me." Then she opened her bag. Her hands were steady, even when her voice shook. She cleaned the wound gently, talking the whole time, not to Ernie, but to the creature. Quiet things, comforting sounds, the same way she spoke to dying dogs or horses hit by trucks. At one point, the young one crawled over and put a hand on her arm. She stopped, blinked, then smiled without looking up. "It's okay, baby. I'm just trying to help her." Ernie watched, jaw clenched. He'd known Tess for years, known she was kind. But he didn't expect this. Not the calm, not the bravery, not the way she used her own jacket to prop up the mother's head like she was someone's wife. Not a wild thing bleeding in the dark. When they finished, they didn't speak much. Tess packed her things slowly, careful not to make sudden moves. She didn't look at Ernie until they were halfway back up the ridge. "I can't tell anyone," she said, voice raw. "You know that, right?" "I wouldn't ask you to." She nodded. "Still, I could lose everything." "I know. I'm not sorry, though." He looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, he smiled. That night she came back, brought more supplies, bandages, antibiotic cream, water. She stayed longer, talked more, and they weren't alone. Someone else came back too, Milo. He didn't say a word when he first arrived, just crouched on the far side of the creek, staring through the slats of the bridge at the soft glow of a lantern. His face was pale, dirty, his notebook clutched in his hands. Ernie noticed him first. "Boy," he said without turning. "You got something to say. Say it." Milo stepped forward slowly, one hand trembling. He looked at the mother, then the child, then Tess, then finally at Ernie. "I saw it," he whispered. "I saw what they did. I ran. I was scared." Tess didn't move, just watched. "I shouldn't have left," he said, voice cracking. "I should have helped. I'm sorry." Ernie didn't raise his voice, didn't scold. He just stared at the boy for a long time, then said, "Wrong's only permanent if you let it sit there. You came back. That counts." Milo wiped his face on his sleeve, then stepped closer. But danger has a way of circling kindness. The poachers came back the next day. Not all of them. Just two. Rough voices, cigarettes, and cocky laughs. Milo was the first to hear them. He ducked beneath the bridge and motioned frantic toward Ernie. "Don't move," Ernie said, quiet. The voices grew louder. Then silence. And then footsteps, crunching gravel, too close. One of them shouted, "Thought I heard something moving down here." They were near the opening now, flashlights sweeping across rock. And then, like a shadow sliding out from fog, the mother stepped into view. She didn't growl, didn't scream. She just walked. One step, one slow, deliberate step into the half-light. The men stopped cold. Ernie couldn't see their faces, but he heard the shift in breath, the way bravado turned into silence. No one moved. Then one of them muttered, "Nope," and they turned, left without a word. Only the sound of boots slapping mud remained. Milo exhaled so hard he nearly fell over. That night, everything changed. Tess came back again. She had fewer supplies. Her eyes were rimmed red. "They found out I took things," she said. Didn't say how, but I know they know. "You fired?" "Not yet." "Worried?" She looked down at the young one now curled asleep beside her, then back at Ernie. "No." Ernie looked at her the way you look at someone you'd misjudged for too long, then nodded. The fire crackled between them, casting flickering light up onto the bridge's beams, the twisted roots, the old wood stained with years of storms. A family had formed here, not one anyone would recognize, not the kind that came with blood or papers, but something real, something unspoken. The mother lay with her head resting near Ernie's foot now. The swelling had started to ease. The fever was down. The little one breathed steady. And somewhere in the dark beyond the trees, the world moved on, too fast, too cruel, too blind to see what was happening here beneath an old wooden bridge in a forgotten Kentucky hollow. But it was happening, and it would not be forgotten. Not by the boy who came back, not by the nurse who gave up safety for something bigger, not by the old man who ran toward the tracks when no one else did, and not by the creatures who had never known mercy. Until now. The summer heat held heavy in the air, but under the bridge, something sacred had taken root. Something small, fragile, born not of magic or legend, but of choice, and it would not be undone. Not easily, not without a fight. Fall came with no announcement, no grand parade of leaves just yet. But the air changed. You could taste it. The sweat of summer had dried up, and every breeze now carried the promise of something colder, something coming. In a town like Clover Gap, folks felt the shift in their bones before the trees even noticed. You'd hear it in the way they spoke. Shorter greetings, longer pauses, as if even their words were turning in for the season. And with it came something else, whispers, not the kind that die in the wind, the kind that root deep. There's something under that old bridge, they said. Not a raccoon, not a bobcat, bigger. Something wrong. It started with Bobby Ray from the gas station claiming he heard a child crying in the creek bed. But when he climbed down, there was nothing but a half-eaten squirrel and prints too wide to be human. Then Miss Delia swore she saw a pair of eyes in the woods while walking back from church choir. High up, glowing faint like fog lights, watching but never blinking. Gideon Rusk, the youngest deputy in Harlan County, didn't believe any of it. He believed in paperwork, in routine. He wore his badge tight and his shirts tighter, proud of the way he rose faster than anyone expected, considering his daddy drank himself out of a job and his older brother didn't make it past sophomore year. But now he stood in the alley behind the general store, squinting at a pile of rope that wasn't supposed to be there. It was thick, freshly frayed, bits of mud clinging to the fibers. Red mud, not the kind from the North Road. The kind that only came from down by the bridge. He didn't move right away, just stared. Thought about the rumors. Thought about the boy who'd been caught snooping under the bridge last week, Milo Cade. Kid said he dropped his fishing hook, but his hands had been shaking. Something didn't add up. Not that day, not the next. Because right around then, she came back to town. Vera Langford. Nobody called her Vera. She was always Miss Langford, or the lady on the hill. And she liked it that way. Drove a mint green Cadillac with white walls so clean they looked painted. She had a voice like sugar and smoke, and when she spoke, you'd swear she already knew the answer to whatever she was asking. She moved through Clover Gap like someone who'd never left, even though she had. Years ago, after her husband passed and her name started showing up in county land bids, somehow she still owned half the ridge. Nobody remembered signing the papers that let that happen. She didn't just reappear, she arrived. At the diner, at the church, at the autumn fair committee like nothing had changed. That same week, a man in a gray vest knocked on Ernie Barlow's door. He didn't say his name, just called himself an associate. Said he'd heard about the old man's act of heroism. Pulling a poor animal off the tracks like that could have been a child, bless your soul. Then came the offer. Not a bribe, not exactly. Just a little help. Money, new coat, even a trailer hookup closer to town. A quiet place, warm bed, no more collecting cans. All Ernie had to do was say he'd seen a wild bear. That was all. Just say bear instead of anything else. Ernie didn't raise his voice, didn't curse. Just stood there in his fraying jacket, hands shoved deep in his pockets, and shook his head once. The man smiled, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "Well," he said, "you're a proud man. I respect that. I truly do." Then he got back in the car and drove straight up the road leading to Vera Langford's estate. Tess heard about it the next day. She didn't say much, just sat in Ernie's makeshift lean-to with a tin cup of lukewarm coffee, looking at the mother Bigfoot's leg. The swelling was down. The fur had begun to grow back over the scabbed ridge. The little one, Kestrel, Ernie had started calling him without knowing why, was climbing along the root limbs nearby, testing his weight, curious and unafraid. He was bigger already, stronger. She watched them both, then looked at Ernie. "You told him no." "I didn't even tell him that much." Tess nodded, and Milo, who sat by the fire, scribbled in that same dog-eared notebook. paused to look up. He'd written something new last night, something that still buzzed behind his ears. It was a plate number. Virginia tags. Black sedan. He'd memorized it by accident. He wrote it down and tucked it under his pillow like a secret he didn't know the meaning of yet. Later that week, Gideon found him behind the library. "What are you writing?" Milo jumped. "Close the book quick." "Just drawing." "You draw license plates often?" Milo didn't answer. Gideon leaned in a little, enough to see the edge of the note peeking from the book's corner. And something else caught his eye. An oil smudge. The kind left when someone grips something too tight with dirty hands, or hides it in a glove compartment. He didn't push. Not yet. That night, the air turned colder. Wind picked up across the hollow. The creek ran louder, and someone left a package on the back porch of Tess Hartley's trailer, wrapped in butcher paper, tied with baling twine. Inside, a Polaroid photo. Tess held it up in her kitchen light, hands trembling. It was grainy, overexposed, but clear enough. A baby Bigfoot, tied, muzzle bound, eyes wild. And next to it, Vera Langford, hand outstretched like she was feeding a dog at the zoo. No smile, no fear, just business. Tess didn't sleep that night. She went to Ernie's the next morning. She didn't say a word, just showed him the photo. He stared at it a long time, then reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out the same dull folding knife he'd used on the tracks. Set it on the stump between them. "I don't want a war," he said. "But I ain't pretending I didn't see what I saw." She nodded. That afternoon, Deputy Gideon Rusk followed a hunch. He walked up the hill to Vera's estate, past the iron gates that had been open since morning. No guards, no dogs, just silence and roses that smelled too strong for October. He knocked once. Vera opened the door herself. "Deputy," she said with that syrupy drawl, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" He didn't answer, just held up a small scrap of rope, red clay still clinging to the fibers. "You've been transporting livestock lately, ma'am." She smiled, wide. "Why, no, but thank you for checking. Can I offer you some sweet tea?" He didn't take the glass, didn't stay long, but when he left, he looked back once and saw her standing in the doorway, not waving, not smiling anymore, just watching. The way predators do when they know you're too close but not close enough. And that night, down under the bridge, Ernie sat by the fire with Kestrel curled against his boot. Tess paced nearby. Milo stared into the flames. None of them spoke for a long while. Then Tess whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "There's some people too rich to be afraid, but I think we just made her nervous." Ernie didn't reply. He just picked up the knife, turned it in his hands once, then placed it back beside him in the dirt. The creek kept running. The fire hissed low, and somewhere far above, Vera Langford stood on her hill, the wind tangling in her perfect hair, listening to a world that was no longer just hers. And if you listened closely, past the buzz of gossip and the hum of old wires stretching across hollers and pines, you might have heard something deeper moving through Clover Gap. Not a rumor, not a story, a shift. Because the people who had always looked away were starting to look closer, and the ones who watched from the trees had never stopped. The fog had teeth that morning. It didn't drift. It clung, hung thick in the hollows and wrapped around every branch, every slope, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. The trees stood still. No birdsong, no wind. Just that kind of silence that presses in on your ribs like an old guilt. Ernie Barlow stood at the edge of the tree line, not moving, not even blinking, as the creek behind him hissed through the rocks. Somewhere deep in the woods, something had shifted. He didn't know how to name it, but his body felt it first. He hadn't planned to come this far out. He'd meant to take Kestrel only halfway up the ridge, stretch his growing legs a little, give Sable time to rest her bad ankle and pick at the roots she liked under the moss bank. But Kestrel had taken off, not in panic, just curiosity, almost like he knew something waited up there. Ernie had tried calling softly, then louder, until he gave up and followed, crunching slowly through the damp brush. his joints complaining more than usual. That's when he realized it wasn't just the fog that felt wrong. It was the quiet behind it, the absence of animals, of breath. He stopped at the base of a rock outcrop, rough limestone streaked with moisture, and there, right above him on the ridge, stood Kestrel, still, upright, his arms at his sides, not scared, not tense, just waiting. Then Ernie saw what the boy was looking at. Shapes in the trees, not moving, not close, but watching. The mountains seemed to bend around them, tall, broad, not towering like legends say, but heavy with age. Their fur blended into the trees, the fog, the ridges of bark. Their faces were unreadable from that distance, but their posture was clear, present, alert, waiting. Kestrel didn't move, and neither did Ernie. He didn't know how long they stood like that. Minutes, maybe. Long enough for his breath to shorten, and for the old fear to rise and then fall again. The kind of fear you get when you realize you're not alone in a place you thought you knew. But it wasn't fear that held him still. It was recognition, because even from across the clearing, even with fog between them, he could tell these were not animals. They were people. Hollow people, yes, ghost-like in how they moved and watched and breathed without sound, but people just the same. One of them stepped forward. Slightly. Just a shift of weight, a tilt of shoulder, and Kestrel let out a sound, not loud, not joyful, but something soft and low, like a greeting you only use with family. Then came the pull. Not physical, not even emotional, just a shift. The moment changed. Ernie's foot slid forward by instinct. But then Kestrel looked back, and Ernie understood. He wasn't invited further. Not yet. He stayed rooted. Like he knew crossing one more step would be too much. Kestrel turned back toward the ridge. His body language folded, slightly awkward now, unsure. He wanted to go, but something in him didn't. Then one of the shapes lifted a hand, only slightly. Open palm, no sound, no signal, but Ernie felt the message in his ribs. Not now, not ready. Then they faded back, one by one, like the mountain exhaled them, and Kestrel turned. Looked down at Ernie, chest rising fast now, like he was fighting back something deeper than breath. Ernie opened his arms. The boy leapt into them. The silence broke behind them like a branch snapping underfoot, and Ernie's knees nearly gave out. A metal snap echoed too close. He whipped around. Saw the glint of wire. An old snare stretched across the base of the hill, hidden beneath dry brush. 2 more steps and he'd have been caught. He stared at it, heart pounding. And that's when the growl came. Low. From the side. Sable stepped out from the fog, slow, deliberate. She moved between him and the snare, her breath visible in the cold morning air. Her body hunched slightly. Shoulders squared, no teeth shown, no aggression, just presence. A line drawn, and Ernie understood again. Not a warning, a guard. She had followed him up the hill without him noticing. Lame foot and all. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. He reached down, snapped the snare with his boot, and crushed the trigger wire with a stone until the spring coil groaned apart. When he looked up, Sable was already gone. But the fog behind her remained. Later that day, back near the base trail, someone else was walking with questions in his pocket. Deputy Gideon Rusk. He wasn't in uniform, didn't need the badge today. He'd been carrying something heavier. He'd spent the last week tracing his way through inconsistencies, shipment logs that didn't match livestock records, tire tracks that led too far up ridges no farmer had business driving. And yesterday, he'd found a trail camera. Not one set by the county. One hidden low, taped with camo cloth, pointed not at deer, but toward the bridge. He hadn't taken it, just watched it, waited, until a man in hunter's orange came to check it, and left with a fresh roll of film and a cigar tucked behind his ear. Gideon didn't sleep well after that. He thought of Vera Langford, thought of how her voice never went up or down, just flat, like a preacher reading someone else's prayer. Thought of Ernie, too, his refusal to explain anything, and the silence he wrapped around himself like armor. So Gideon walked that trail, Slow, careful, still uncertain which side of it he was even on. He meant to cut east, but something pulled him west. A rustle, a feeling, and then a sound he couldn't name. Not quite a voice, not quite a howl, just breath, massive and measured. He turned and saw her. Sable. Not close, not moving, but there, watching. Not from the shadows, from full view. He reached instinctively for his holster, then stopped halfway. The creature wasn't moving toward him, wasn't preparing to. It just stood. And behind it, a smaller shape. Kestrel, hands clutching a vine, eyes open wide, looking directly at Gideon. No fear, no threat, just seeing. Gideon lowered his hand, stared, and in that single moment, he saw something he hadn't seen in years. Family. A mother, a child, not monsters, not myths. He backed away slowly, step by step. Sable didn't follow, didn't vanish, just watched, until the fog swallowed her again. That night at Ernie's fire, Tess didn't ask questions. She poured hot water over roots she said helped with nerves, and handed him the tin mug. Ernie stared into the flames. "They don't want him back yet," he said. "Not until something changes." Tess looked over. "Why?" "He touched me. When I pulled him off those tracks." That's what Sable meant that first day. "In their eyes, that did something?" He nodded. "In their eyes," he said slowly. "He's different now." Tess didn't speak for a while, then whispered, "Maybe we all are." And from the ridge above, somewhere behind the pine wall, the hollow people waited. Not angry, not mourning, just waiting, because a line had been crossed, not in anger, but in bond. And the child who had been taken had touched something not meant to be touched, which meant something sacred had to be decided, not by force, but by time. And beneath the bridge, as the fire crackled low and the mist drifted down again, Kestrel curled into Ernie's coat, not in fear, not in need, but in trust. A trust that couldn't be undone. And the mountain, for once, didn't argue. Winter didn't come in like a storm. It came quiet, slow. The way dusk settles over a field. First the birds stop, then the wind forgets to move. And then, suddenly, you realize everything's turned cold and no one told you. By mid-December, the nights in Clover Gap stretched long like an old shadow, and every beam under that railroad bridge ached from frost. The creek still ran, but slower now. Thicker, as if even water had started to second-guess itself. Ernie Barlow sat by the fire with his hands tucked inside his sleeves, eyes fixed on the edge of flame. He wasn't shivering, but he hadn't felt warm in days. The heat from the logs barely touched his bones anymore. He'd gotten thinner without noticing. Time did that. It didn't steal in a rush. It peeled. Kestrel sat just a few feet away, perched atop a flat rock, legs tucked, arms folded. He didn't look like a child anymore. Not human, not exactly, but not creature either. There was weight in him now. Muscle. Curiosity still bloomed in his gestures, but the wildness was coming through stronger every day. The way he moved, more silent than a squirrel now. The way he tracked birds overhead, not in wonder, but in understanding. He mimicked sounds, picked up patterns, could lift a boulder Ernie couldn't budge. And once, when startled by a whippoorwill's sudden call, he'd let out a warning yelp so low and guttural it made Ernie's spine go stiff. Ernie had started sleeping with one eye open. He didn't tell Tess. Didn't need to. She saw it. She always did. She'd been quieter these past few weeks. Visiting less. Bringing food, yes. Blankets, dry socks, ointment. But something had settled behind her eyes. Something like dread. Today, she just stood by the fire, arms crossed tight over her chest, her nurse's jacket too thin for the cold. But she wouldn't take the one Ernie offered. "He's changing," she said finally. Ernie nodded. "He has to. We don't know how much more." "We weren't supposed to keep him this long." She looked up at him, eyes hard. "You saying that now?" "I've been saying it. You just didn't want to hear it." Kestrel let out a sound behind them, half a chirp, half a bark, and snapped a stick clean in two with one hand, then dropped it, moved on. No aggression, just instinct. Tess turned, watched him as he climbed the roots like a staircase, then crouched beneath the archway where shadows nested like birds. "He trusts us," she said. "That's the problem," Ernie said. That night, Ernie didn't sleep. He sat with his back against the inner beam of the bridge, knife in hand, not for use, just for feel. Something was chewing at the edge of his chest. Not fear. Not exactly. Just knowledge. He couldn't keep them safe anymore. Not really. Kestrel was too strong, too quick. Sable was healing, yes, but still limping slightly. And more than that, the ridge hadn't been silent lately. More movement in the woods, more tire tracks where none should have been. He heard a howl 2 nights ago. It wasn't coyote. It wasn't Bigfoot either. It was something worse. People. Not just poachers. Hunters. Word had gotten out. And no bridge or campfire or silent understanding would be enough when men with rifles decided to prove a point. So before dawn, Ernie got up. He didn't take food, didn't leave a note. Just put on his boots, wrapped the scarf Tess had knitted around his neck, and walked. His limp had gotten worse, but he didn't stop. He climbed the ridgeline slow, like a man going to confession. And when he got to the old ranger station, a lonely wood shack with a busted roof and a radio that barely picked up weather, he knocked. Then he knocked again. It took 15 minutes before someone answered. "Jesus, Ernie, what the hell are you doing up here?" "Need to talk to whoever's in charge." "You mean now?" Ernie looked him in the eye. "I mean right now." By noon there was movement. Calls made, radios buzzed. A truck rolled up the switchback trail with chains on its tires and 2 men in wildlife jackets inside. One had a clipboard. The other had a tranquilizer gun slung too casual across his chest. Ernie didn't look at the gun, just at the eyes behind it. "I'll lead you down," he said. "No tricks," the man with the clipboard said. "I'd be real stupid to try, wouldn't I?" They walked. No one spoke for a long while, until they were halfway down the trail. That's when they heard it. A low thrum, like a growl held in the gut too long. Then it rose. A sharp sound. Too loud for a bird, too low for a wolf. Kestrel. He'd sensed it before they arrived. Ernie stopped. The men did too. Then the one with the gun stepped forward, and Sable stepped out of the trees. No roar, no lunge. She just appeared, like always, in full height, wounded foot planted solid, chest heaving from the run. She looked at Ernie first, then at the men. She didn't charge. She didn't run. She just stood between them and the creek. The man with the clipboard raised his voice, tried calm. "It's okay. We're here to help." Ernie stepped forward. "No, you're not." He didn't yell, just moved between them, then raised both arms, palms up. "I told her I'd protect him." "Ernie, move!" "She won't run. She's not gonna fight. But you raise that gun, and you break every chance you got." Kestrel appeared beside her now, shoulders high, teeth bared, not in hate, in defense. The moment hung there, heavy as the sky. Then Ernie dropped to one knee, held out his hands to the boy. "Kestrel," he whispered, "come here." The boy tilted his head, looked at his mother, then back at Ernie, took a step, another, then reached out, hesitant, until his palm met Ernie's fingers. The same hand that pulled him from the tracks, the same hand that fed him, that named him, that would now let him go. Ernie turned. "He's ready," he said. Sable let out a sound like breath forced through pain. Then she stepped forward and walked into the open crate. No one pushed, no one forced. She went in of her own will. The gun lowered, and the men stared like they were watching something biblical. Kestrel stayed behind, 1 foot forward, 1 foot back, torn. He looked at Ernie, then at Tess, who had come up the trail fast, eyes wide, hands shaking. "Kestrel," she said, voice soft. "Go." The boy stepped forward, then turned, and pressed his hand through the bars, into Ernie's. Just once, then turned away. The crate door closed, the lock clicked, and the forest swallowed the sound. That night the bridge was empty, the fire was cold, and Ernie sat with his hands in his lap, looking at nothing. Tess beside him, neither of them speaking. The creek still ran, though slower now. Hesitant, like it wasn't sure which way to go. And far in the trees, something watched. Not to judge, just to remember. Spring crept in without ceremony, just the way Clover Gap liked it. No fanfare, no sudden blossoms, just a slow, steady thaw. The snow pulled back from the roots. The mud thickened under boots. Somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker started tapping again like someone testing if the world was still worth waking up. But even in the warmer air, something else was beginning to rot. The town wasn't whispering anymore. It was arguing. You could feel it when you walked into the post office. Mrs. Jane Talley pausing mid-conversation when someone stepped through the door. You heard it in the diner where folks asked louder than usual, "You really think it was just a bear?" You saw it in the eyes of people passing each other on the sidewalk, wary, weighing, waiting for the first real piece of proof to tilt everything one way or the other. Something had cracked wide open after the crate was loaded and the creatures taken away. Folks said the truck rolled out before dawn. Some said they saw lights in the trees. Others swore they heard a voice. Low, not quite human, calling from the woods. Truth was, no one really knew what happened up at the ridge that night. But they knew who might. And that's when the town remembered Vera Langford. She hadn't been seen much since Christmas. Her Cadillac still sat out front, polished weekly by some boy who didn't live around here. The gate was still padlocked most days. The old house still cast its shadow over half the holler. But the woman herself, she'd gone quiet. Too quiet. That was enough for Gideon Rusk. He wasn't a reckless man. He was raised poor, like most here, raised to mind his own unless something screamed otherwise. But some things didn't scream. Some things just waited too long. He started with the rope. That same thick braided kind he'd seen near the outcrop 2 months back. The one crusted with red clay that didn't come from any cow field. He remembered the faint chemical smell too. Sedative? Could be. He wasn't a vet, but he had a nose for things that didn't belong. Then came the delivery logs. The hardware store in town didn't sell that kind of rope, but a shipment had come through from Lexington late fall, paid in cash, picked up under a different name. Marla Jennings, a name that didn't show up on any utility records in Harlan County. But when he ran it through DMV records, it was an alias used once before. Back in '89, tied to a property deed, an old coal plot bought dirt cheap, transferred later that same year to Langford Holdings. Gideon didn't say anything for 2 days. He just watched. Then came the mechanic. Tess had dropped it casually, half story, half question. Said she heard Denny Weaver mention a strange car he'd worked on. Something fancy, foreign, with dried mud underneath the wheel wells. Said he had to flush out the undercarriage from some god-awful muck that smelled like creek bottom and engine oil. Gideon drove out to the shop that afternoon. Didn't ask straight, just stood there leaning on the hood of an old Bronco, letting Denny ramble. And ramble he did. I mean, she said it hit a deer. Denny chuckled, scratching the back of his neck. But hell, Ernie Barlow's old mutt could smell better than that story. What kind of deer kicks your fender from underneath and leaves handprints? Gideon didn't flinch. What did you say? Denny blinked. What? You said handprints. I didn't say that. You did. Silence. Then Denny looked down at his boots. Look, man, I don't want trouble. I ain't bringing trouble. I'm bringing questions. Denny reached behind the tool cabinet and pulled out a rag-wrapped envelope. Inside were 3 Polaroids. Grainy, but damning. One showed the undercarriage, caked in red clay and what looked like blood. Another, rope burns across the wheel axle. And the last one made Gideon stop breathing. The edge of a furred limb, bent, tied. And behind it, Vera Langford, wearing a scarf, white leather gloves. And that same calm expression she always wore when telling half the town what fundraiser she was so graciously chairing this year. He didn't take the photos. He didn't have to. He'd already memorized them. That evening, Tess opened the door to her trailer and found a manila envelope wedged under her mat. Inside was a note, written in block letters. These belong to the town. She doesn't own truth. The photos were inside, along with a typed receipt for sedatives, vet grade, bought 6 weeks prior, from a clinic in Somerset. Signed for in person. Name on the form? Langford V. Tess didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just picked up her keys and drove to Ernie. He was sitting alone behind the bait shop, watching the river like it might offer him something new. She handed him the envelope. He opened it. Didn't say a word. Until... I always knew she had a cellar heart, he said. The kind that stays cool even when the whole house burns down. Tess sat beside him. So what do we do? Ernie looked out toward the hills, toward the tree line. We do it the old way, he said. No tech, no press, no noise, just people. They went to Sheriff Lawson first. He listened, nodded slow, took the envelope without a word and said, You know, if we do this, we're not unringing the bell. I know. You ready for her to come swinging? Ernie's eyes didn't blink. I've been hit harder. The arrest didn't happen at night. It happened on a Tuesday, midday, so the whole town could watch. Sheriff Lawson, 2 deputies, and 1 county wildlife officer in plain clothes. They walked up the hill, knocked on the door. She answered, smiling. In pearls, as if she'd been waiting. They read the charges. Unlawful possession of a protected species, illegal sedation and transportation, obstruction of investigation, false identity. She didn't protest, didn't shout, just turned, set her tea down on a crystal tray, and said, I assume this means you'll need my lawyer's number. At the bottom of the hill, folks stood quiet, watching. No one spoke. No one moved, not even Milo, who held Tess's hand and clutched his notebook like it was a shield. They put her in the cruiser, drove her slow through town, and no one waved. The court date came fast. Testimony was short. The evidence was too clean, too much, too true. She had no defense, just arrogance. Ernie sat on the witness bench, back straight, voice calm. When asked what made him intervene that day on the tracks, he didn't ramble, didn't explain. He just looked at the jury and said, I heard crying, so I ran. That was it. That's what broke the silence. Not proof, not photos, just that. The sentence wasn't long enough, some said. Money still bought her comfort, even in consequence. But the truth was out. And truth doesn't go back in the bag. Especially not in a town like Clover Gap. Especially not in spring, when everything buried starts pushing up through the dirt again. And that night, when the news hit the radio and the phones buzzed all up and down the ridge, Tess stood alone behind her trailer and looked out at the dark woods. The wind moved soft through the trees. Not loud, not sharp, just soft, like breath, like memory. And somewhere deep in the canopy, unseen by anyone in town, a shape moved through the pines. Not running, not hunting, just watching. Because even the wild knew. Justice had been spoken. Summer in Clover Gap was a different kind of quiet. Not the stillness of snow, not the hush of fog. This quiet was full of life. Crickets humming under porch steps, kids on rusted bikes cutting corners too fast, screen doors slapping shut behind barefoot laughter. The kind of quiet that lets you breathe, but never lets you forget what came before. The Langford case had settled like dust after a barn fight. No one said her name much anymore. Didn't need to. Justice had been done, at least in the town's eyes, and folks had moved on, outwardly. But there was something else starting to grow in that space. Something less about memory and more about meaning. It started with a check, just a plain white envelope, no return address, slid under the door of the bait shop one morning. Ernie found it stuck under the mat when he came to refill the minnow tanks. He almost tossed it, figuring it was junk, until he saw the numbers. $5,000. A slip of paper with it, for what you did. Don't let it be the end. He didn't say a word to Tess for 3 days. Just folded it, slipped it into the bottom drawer beneath his old union pins, and sat with it. Thought about where it came from, what it meant. But then another envelope came, and another. Not all with money. Some with typed letters, some with donations in kind. A camera, a water purifier, a solar panel wrapped in bubble tape. Then came the stories, written by hand, left at the library counter, pushed into the offering plate at church. Folks saying, I saw something once too. I never told anyone, but now I think maybe I should have. It wasn't just Clover Gap either. Letters came from Jackson, from Berea, Even one from a guy in Asheville who claimed his father had tracked 2 shadows in 1964 and quit hunting the same week. No one wanted fame. No one asked for credit. They just wanted it known. Someone believed. By mid-July, Tess had filled an entire binder. Handwritten testimonies, newspaper clippings, hand-drawn maps. She brought it to Ernie one morning and dropped it in his lap. "This ain't just your story anymore," she said. "It's ours." He didn't argue. Didn't even look surprised. But he did ask, "What are we supposed to do with it?" "Protect it." It was Milo who said the word first. Sitting cross-legged on Ernie's porch, notebook open, chewing the end of a pen. "A trust," he said. "Like the land ones, for animals or wetlands or whatever. Except for them. Not just the Bigfoot. The stories. The folks who still see something worth guarding." They stared at him. He didn't blink, so they called it that. Ridgewatch Trust. They started small. Just a file in Tess's desk drawer and a stack of envelopes. Then someone told someone, and a retired park ranger from Pineville offered to help. Then a librarian from Corbin. Then a biology teacher from Pikeville who didn't laugh once the whole meeting. Before long, they were printing flyers, holding weekend gatherings out at the fire circle. Not to sensationalize, to remember. But not everyone liked it. There were people who thought it was foolish, who said letting it all die in peace was more respectful. Others called it a grift, said Ernie was just chasing attention, maybe even money. One woman at the town hall shouted that no real Christian would protect monsters. She was escorted out, but not before throwing a flyer in Tess's face. Then came the man from Nashville. Clean cut, good teeth, suit that didn't belong in this county. He said he ran a wildlife media company, had been following the Langford trial, wanted to partner with the trust, build a series, film a docu-feature, maybe even get them on public television. He bought coffee for everyone at the diner, even offered to pay to rebuild the footbridge near the old trailhead, called it a symbol of access. Tess said no before Ernie could speak. "We're not selling anything." But the man smiled, slow. "You already did," he said. "You just don't know the price yet." The next week, the trust almost fell apart. Not from outsiders, from inside. One of the new members, a guy from Lexington who called himself a conservationist, said they needed structure, said they needed to formalize, file as a non-profit, get a board, hold votes. Ernie just listened. Let them argue, until someone mentioned using the trust to purchase trail rights for a nature walk. Tourism, they said. Careful tourism. That's when he stood up. Everyone quieted without being told. "You start selling something sacred," Ernie said, voice low. "You don't own it anymore." No one spoke. He took off his cap, held it in his hands like a truth he couldn't carry any other way. "I didn't start this to be known. I didn't start it to be thanked. I started it because no one else was looking out for what mattered. You want to make it a brand? You can, but you'll do it without me." He left. Tess followed. Milo sat a long time before closing his notebook and walking out behind them. The next morning, there were 3 envelopes under Ernie's door, each with one sentence inside. You were right. The trust stayed, but it changed. No logos, no cameras, no sales. Just stories, protection, truth. Word spread in a quieter way. Not on the radio, not in papers. Just neighbor to neighbor, forest to forest. A network that had no maps. Just trust. And one evening, Ernie walked the trail behind his house and found something that hadn't been there before. A carved wooden sign, weathered, hung by old twine from a bent birch. The words burned in by hand. "Save the one in front of you." He stared at it for a long time. Long enough for the sun to dip low behind the ridge and bathe the path in gold. Long enough for the wind to stir the branches overhead. Long enough to know he wasn't alone. Not really. Not anymore. And somewhere in the quiet beyond, where pine meets stone and memory breathes like morning fog, something moved. Not to be seen, just to remind him it still watched, still waited, still believed. And that was enough. The morning was too still. The kind of still that always comes before something permanent happens, when the earth seems to hush itself, like it knows a boundary's about to be crossed. In the woods above Clover Gap, The trees had turned. Bright canopies of orange and red and rust trembled just slightly in the breeze. But the wind wasn't loud. It didn't howl. It only whispered, the way memories do when they don't want to be forgotten. Ernie stood near the clearing with his hands in his coat pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, not from the cold, but from the weight of something that couldn't be named. It had rained the night before, just enough to darken the bark and make the air taste like earth and pine. A trail had been cleared. No press, no signs. Just a path cut by people who knew it wasn't the trees they were carving through. It was a moment. The wildlife truck sat further down the hill, silent now. Its engine ticked as it cooled. The cage was positioned facing the open woods, door unlatched, ramp down. No ceremony, no countdown, just the hinge waiting to move. Tess stood nearby, arms crossed over her chest. She'd barely spoken since dawn. Her face was calm, but her jaw was tight. She didn't wear makeup today, didn't wear her usual white coat either. Just jeans, a flannel, and an old ball cap pulled low. She hadn't asked for any pictures. Refused the idea when someone suggested documenting it. Let them leave without a flashbulb chasing their heels, she said. Let them leave like they were never ours to begin with. Milo was off to the side, sitting on a rock with his notebook closed. For once, he wasn't scribbling. Just watching. He'd outgrown most of his fear by now, but he hadn't outgrown reverence. You could see it in the way he sat, still, alert, like he was waiting for a story to finish writing itself. Then the moment came, a thump from inside the cage. Soft, then a second. The metal creaked slightly as Sable shifted her weight. She was crouched at the rear, shoulders hunched, face turned toward the trees. Her breathing was audible now, deep, controlled, not panicked, not confused, just waiting. Ernie didn't move, didn't speak. Another minute passed. Then the young one stepped forward, taller now, thicker across the chest. The soft roundness of childhood had begun to fall away. His stride was stronger, arms longer, feet more sure. He stepped down the ramp without looking back, almost like instinct had told him the next chapter was somewhere up the ridge and all he had to do was walk toward it. But halfway across the clearing he stopped, turned, and looked at Ernie. There wasn't fear in his eyes, there wasn't sadness. But there was something harder to name, something that made time bend. He stepped toward him, not fast, just steady. And when he got close enough, he reached out his hand, not to pull, not to hold, just to place it once, gently, against Ernie's chest. The same way his mother had that first day by the tracks. A palm laid flat. A message left without sound. Then he turned again and walked into the trees. The silence afterward wasn't empty. It was full. Full of everything that had been carried and passed between them without a single word spoken. Sable watched from the cage, still unmoving, still inside. Tess turned to Ernie, her voice barely a breath. She's not going. She will. The wind picked up slightly. A single yellow leaf dropped near the ramp, spun once, and landed upright. Then Sable stood. She didn't rush, didn't bolt. She stepped down slowly, head high, eyes scanning the tree line. And then she turned, not toward her son, not toward the woods, but toward Ernie. For one long second they stared at each other. And then she did something that would stay carved into his memory like initials in wet stone. She crossed the clearing, stopped just at the edge of the grass, knelt, one leg bent, one arm braced, and placed her open hand against the nearest tree. Not to steady herself, but like someone making an oath. She bowed her head, then stood again, and vanished into the trees without looking back. Ernie stayed still for a long time. No one said anything. The wind stirred the branches. The leaves rustled gently like footsteps receding into memory. The woods closed around them once more. No roar, no snap of limbs, just silence. Tess exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Her fingers brushed her cheek, surprised to find it wet. Milo didn't speak. He just flipped to a new page and drew what he remembered. A clearing, a tree, a hand pressed gently to its bark. And Ernie. He stood by himself now. No crate, no visitors. Just the sound of the forest returning to itself. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his old pocket watch, the one that hadn't worked since the night he ran to the tracks. The hands were frozen at 4:12. They always had been. He flipped it open, thumb brushing the face, and then something odd happened. The second hand twitched. Once, then again. He stared at it, waiting. The tick was faint, almost inaudible. But it was there, moving again, slow. Sure. He closed the watch gently, as if not to spook it. Tess stepped beside him. He didn't turn. "They're not gone," he said quietly. "They're just where they're meant to be." She nodded. He started walking toward the trailhead. Tess followed. Milo lagged behind, staring one last time into the woods, then jogging to catch up. At the edge of the path, where the gravel met the grass, a small wooden sign had been hammered into the dirt. No one admitted putting it there. No one claimed to know who carved it. But the words were clean, burnt deep into the grain. Save the one in front of you. And that was enough. No plaques, no ribbon cuttings. Just a reminder for whoever needed it. As they walked down the hill, the trees whispered behind them. Not loud, not mournful, just real. And in Clover Gap, that summer faded without drama. No big headlines, no national stories. Just folks who knew, and folks who chose to carry it forward. The woods stayed full. The mountains stayed watching. And somewhere far beyond what most eyes can hold, a young one grew taller, learned the trees, remembered the hands that saved him. Because kindness once given doesn't vanish. It lingers, even after the door swings shut, even after the trail disappears, even when no one is looking, it lingers. Sometimes, what we think of as the end is really just the echo of something ancient returning home. This was never just a story about the strange, or the hidden, or the wild things that move without sound. It was always about the space between one heart and another, the choices made when no one's watching, the quiet defiance of kindness in a world that too often forgets it matters. In the hush of the forest, or the silence between two people who understand each other without needing words, there lives a truth we often overlook. What we protect says more about us than what we conquer. We live in a time that moves fast. People scroll past pain, rush past beauty, and forget that the sacred is rarely loud. But every once in a while, a moment comes that asks something simple, something old. Not for noise, not for proof, just for mercy. Just for someone to care enough to pause and ask, is this worth saving? And the answer, almost always, is yes. There are things we may never fully understand. Creatures we may never capture with cameras, or names, or facts. But understanding is not the same as connection. Sometimes, connection happens first. When we sit still long enough to hear what the world is whispering. When we choose compassion not because it's easy or rewarded, but because it's right. Because the truest measure of who we are isn't in how we treat what looks like us, thinks like us, or agrees with us. It's in how we care for what cannot ask, for what can only hope. That, more than anything, is what endures. The world is full of stories that slip through the cracks. Stories of quiet bravery, of unseen love, of souls who step forward when no one else will. This was just one of them. And if it stirred something in you, if it made you pause, even for a breath, then maybe that's the beginning of something else. Not the kind you read, the kind you live. Thank you for walking with us through the fog, through the trees, and into the places we don't always dare to look. If this story meant something to you, let us know in the comments below. Share your thoughts, your feelings, even your own story if you have one. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and follow along, because sometimes the next chapter begins with just one voice saying, "I believe you."